Okay, so in this tutorial, we're going to talk about importing libraries and functions from other programs and setting up for loops and while loops. Okay, so the thing to know about importing libraries and importing other Python files and using them in your files, such as, for example, we'll be discussing the random function that we import and a few other things. And sometimes you might import a math function. And as you can see, there are so many different functions for this random function, and we'll only be discussing a few of them in this tutorial. But there's limitless possibilities with libraries, and there's tons online. You can make your own. You can make functions in other Python files that you later import. So the possibilities are endless. Okay, so the first line imports a random function from Python 2.7 libraries or their default libraries. And then the third line sets up a list of different names of different strings, or different, not names, but phrases. So they're strings because they have the parentheses on either side of them, and they're separated by commas. So there's that separation of commas can separate any different type of data. It could be strings, it could be integers, it could be floats. But you always use a comma, and then you know it's a list or a string or a list or an array by either brackets or parentheses. Another thing to note, and I just added it here, is that there's basically a structure, a very good structure you should probably follow when writing programs to make them simpler for you to understand when you go back to them. So the first thing you should do is import functions needed for later in code. So if you need to use the math function and you need to use sine or cosine, instead of writing a whole big function for it, you can just import it. You should probably do that in the beginning of the program. Or if you use the random function, you probably do it at the beginning of the program. The next line initializes global variables, which in this case is a list, a string, and then a random integer between 30. The next few lines deal with the actual functionality, and they carry out the functionality and operations of the program. And in this case, it just prints the different variables that we listed above, different global variables. But in other cases, you could have, like when we go into while loops and for loops, you could have a while loop that covers basically the whole entire program, a functionality aspect of it. And then inside that, we have separate for loops and separate if, then statements, and else statements. So, but global variables always need to be defined at the top. When we go into non-global variables, local variables, this will become important to not have errors in the code and to make it a lot simpler to understand. Okay, so line 5 sets up a variable called string, which is it's set to a data type of string, which has the characters day, space, and light. And then the next line 7 sets up a variable var _1, and that's set to a random.rand range of 30. That literally means that it goes from 0 to 30, and it chooses a random integer between there. Okay, so the next few lines from 9 to 15, or towards to the end of the program, are to print different random functions, and we'll go over the different types. So type 1, random.choice. It's for 9 and 11, it chooses anything that's within that group. So for a list, it would just choose one string or data type of that list. In this case, the lists are strings, so it just chooses the full string of one of them. So it could choose hello, it could choose goodbye, and then the one below that, line 11, it prints a random choice string. So the string is not actually a data type. It is not a data type. It's actually a variable that we define in number 5 or line 5, and it's set to day light with a space in the middle. And it can actually choose, because it's only one data type of a string, it can choose any letter within that. And that even includes a blank space. So it could choose D, it could choose G, it could choose T. And yeah, that's what you need to know for random choice. It's very good for programs that you want to do something with strings and not very good with integers or a lot of numbers, because numbers you can use other different random functions that you can do with random. Line 13 prints a random.rand int between 0 and 20, so it can choose any integer between those two integers. And those have to be integers, because I think if you put a 0.25 to 20, it's going to give you an error. It wants integers for those values that you plug in. That's your kind of range. I mean, there is actually another function we talked about before above that's random.range, but random.integer, it just chooses two between two extremes. But random.range has to deal with, it goes from 0 to n value all the time. This, you can actually specify where you want your starting value to be, where you want your ending value to be. And it only chooses whole numbers. So this is very good when we talk about writing arrays and for loops and while loops. It makes math a lot simpler, and it makes having eyes a lot easier, and actually able to use them, because if an I is not a whole number, an error happens because it only wants an integer. So that's the overview for, and the breakdown for this random function. And if you want to check more, I would check the link I have below about different other functions that the random function can do. This is just a few of them. There's like thousands. There's not thousands out there, but there is like 20 different things you do. There's a random. You can choose random. It doesn't always have to be super linear. It could be kind of parabolic in nature, and have a kind of standard deviation and a lot of more probability kind of set things that we'll probably discuss in a recent video. I might do the dice when we had to make dice, and then print it out into a graph, like a histogram of what the dice showed up with in a later video, and I think that would be good at explaining how randoms work. Okay, so this is an example of a for loop, and like we discussed earlier in the video, it follows the same kind of basic structure of, if you have any imports, plug it in first, then you plug in your global variables, and then you do your functionality for the program and any other local variables you might do. Line 3 deals with, it creates a global variable which is set to 0.01, or in this case I'm trying to do 1 cent, which a cent or 1 penny is 1/100th of a dollar, so that's why it's set to 0.01. The for loop in number 5 is set to for to I in range 0 to 10 to 1 with a colon after it. Because remember, you have to put your colon after any kind of operations with for, if, while, else. Any of those, you need to put an operation after it. You have to put a colon after it. So what that basically is saying is that I is just a mover, or just like a placeholder thing, but for range. Okay, so I is always set to whatever the beginning of the range is, which in this case, the first number in the parentheses for range is to the left is the starting value. The next number is the top constraint, and then the next number is how much it moves by. So in this case, to start out with, it would be 0, then the next one would be 1, then it would be 2, all the way to 10. And for the one below that, line 6, actually, it's an operation that has to do with for. So it does it every single time because I stops at 10, but it has to go through all the operations first for I to change before it can finish the program. And I'll explain this a little bit, but so if you look down at the bottom where the run program is, you can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different things, and that means it went from 0 to 9. It didn't actually go to 10 because it doesn't go to 10. It just goes from 0 to 9. But you can put 10 there because it indents by 1 every time, and a number always starts at 0. Or I always starts at 0, unless you want to put it as another number. And finally, the variable, global variable var underscore 1, it was equal to 0.01, but every single time we go through the program, I changes, but also, because we have the operation in line 6, variable underscore 1 multiplies by 2 every single time. So it's doubling every single time it runs through. So after 10 times, it has increased its size a lot, as you can see at the bottom. So it starts, the first number is 0.02 at the run program. And you might think, oh, but you started at 0.01. Well, that's because it actually went through the operation first. It multiplied by 2 before you did the first print function at line 7. So order is very important in programming. You could even make another if statement above that that said, if, you could have if var equals less than 0.02, then print it, and then run the program. So then you would start out with 0.01 and then move down. So aside from that, that's just how you can do it. Order is very important in Python. And indentation is, syntax is, but if you have really bad syntax, it should be able to spot your error, and you can fix it before you actually run the program. But that's it for for loops. Okay, so finally we have while loops, and while loops are similar to for loops, yet they don't require a explicit range to run through. They check an operation and then run through it. So it's like an if statement before a for loop. That's basically the simplest answer I can give to what a while loop is. And in line 3, again, you set up the global variable the same. In line 5, the while loop. And then you have the checking operation. It's an expression checking something. So you have the global variable var underscore 1 is being checked. Is it less than 1 million? If it is doubled. And because you can see in line 6 it's doubled, and then you print what it is. And it will run through that a lot of times until the first variable is greater than 1 million. And when it is, it will stop running the while loop. Okay, well, I think I'm done for this tutorial. If you have any more questions on while loops, for loops, or importing stuff to random, please list it in the comments below, and I will try to get back to you, and I will try to make more tutorials that go even in more depth, and I'll try to find some examples that go over these topics.